What the Navajo said was living beneath the abandoned Hogan. There is a photograph taken somewhere in the Chusca Mountains of New Mexico in 2003. It shows an abandoned Hogan, a traditional Navajo 8-sided structure, partially collapsed, with an opening knocked through the north wall. The hole in the north wall is deliberate, it's not decay. The Navajo call it the ghost hole, and it is made when someone dies inside the structure to let the chindi out. You knock the hole and you walk away and you do not come back. That is the rule. That is the law that has governed Navajo habitation for longer than any American state has existed. The man who took that photograph did come back. His name was Daniel Whitehorse, and he was a Navajo Nation cultural liaison working with a university archaeology team surveying the Chusca region for a federal heritage project. He went back to the Hogan 3 times. He took photographs through the ghost hole. He described, in the written notes he filed with the university, what he heard coming from beneath the floor. His supervisors removed his notes from the project file. The notes are gone. The photograph exists because a copy was forwarded to a colleague before the file was cleared. This is where we are starting. Before we go further, if you have found this channel and this is the kind of question that you cannot stop turning over, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are not finished asking. To understand what was described as living beneath that Hogan, you need to understand what a death Hogan actually is, not in the simplified version that gets passed around outside Navajo culture, but in the full weight of what it means. When a Navajo person dies inside a Hogan, the dwelling does not just become empty, it becomes contaminated. The chindi, the ghost or spirit that separates from the body at death, does not carry the good of the person. Navajo belief is precise on this point. The chindi is what is left after everything good has departed. It is the residue. The anger, the grievances, the unfinished business, the parts of a person that did not fit into the pattern of hojo, the Navajo concept of harmony and balance that governs proper living. The chindi is not the person. It is what the person left behind. The ghost hole is cut through the north wall because north is the direction associated with death in Navajo cosmology. The body is removed through it, not through the door. The door is for the living. The north wall is for what cannot stay. The Hogan is then abandoned, sometimes burned, and under no circumstances re-entered. Children are taught this before they can read. Elders enforce it absolutely. The prohibition is not superstition. It is considered a matter of physical safety in the same category as not touching a live wire. The chindi does not leave. It stays inside the structure. It waits. And under specific conditions that traditional Navajo knowledge describes in considerable detail, I have to pause here for a second. Because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. The Navajo creation story is a story of emergence. The Diné, the people, did not begin on the surface of the earth. They began below it. They passed through a series of underworlds, 4 of them in the most common versions of the account, ascending through each until they emerged into this world through a reed, through a passage in the earth, into the light. The worlds below are not metaphor in traditional Navajo understanding. They are places. They have geography. They have inhabitants. Some of those inhabitants did not come up. What stayed below is not described uniformly across clans and regions, but there is a consistent thread running through the accounts gathered by ethnographers from the late 1800s through the mid-20th century. The things that stayed below are old. They predate the Diné. They predate the surface world as the Navajo know it. And in certain locations where the boundary between the surface and the below grows thin, they can be reached from above. And they can reach back. The archaeology of the Colorado Plateau, which includes the Navajo Nation and the territories surrounding it, has produced evidence of subterranean construction going back at least 2,000 years. The ancestral Puebloans, whom the Navajo call the Anasazi, a name with contested translation that some scholars render as ancient enemy and others as ancient ones who are not us, built extensively underground. Kivas, the ceremonial chambers that appear at virtually every significant ancestral Puebloan site, are dug into the earth, The largest great kivas at Chaco Canyon are 60 feet in diameter. They are entered from above, through a hatch in the roof, down a ladder, into darkness. The Sipapu, a small pit in the floor of every kiva, marks the symbolic entrance to the underworld, the emergence point, the hole through which the people came up. But here is what the archaeology also shows, quietly, without much interpretive commentary. Some kivas were sealed, not collapsed, not abandoned with the usual debris of habitation, sealed deliberately, with fill placed to close the entrance, in a pattern inconsistent with ordinary site abandonment. When sealed kivas have been excavated, the deposits inside sometimes contain material that does not match the expected assemblage, objects placed rather than discarded, arrangements that suggest intention rather than accumulation. Some sealed kivas show evidence of continued disturbance from below. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. Process, or you can sit with it. The Navajo accounts of what lives beneath the abandoned hogans do not begin with the 2003 photograph. They are old. They appear in the ethnographic literature in fragments because the full accounts are not shared with outsiders, but what surfaces in the record is consistent enough to work with. Washington Matthews, a physician and ethnographer who worked with the Navajo in the 1880s and 1890s and produced some of the most detailed early documentation of Navajo ceremony and belief, recorded accounts of places he called the Dark Hogans. His notes, held at the Smithsonian, describe specific locations where abandoned death hogans were associated with what his informants described as activity underground, not random noise, not the settling of old structures. Activity with pattern, with repetition, occurring at specific times, associated with specific conditions, the new moon, the coldest nights, the period between midnight and dawn. Matthews was a physician. He did not interpret these accounts as supernatural. He interpreted them as evidence of what he called persistent cultural memory, his phrase for the way certain locations accumulate narrative over generations because something real happened there that the community encodes into warning. In two of the locations he documented in the 1890s, families had abandoned the structures within a single generation of construction, not because of a death inside, because of what they heard before any death occurred inside them. Matthews noted this carefully. The sound, in both cases, came first. The warning, in each location he documented, was the same. Do not go near the floor. The accounts gathered by Gladys Reichard in the 1930s, another ethnographer whose documentation of Navajo ceremonial practice is still considered foundational, include a passage in her field notes that did not appear in her published work. Her published work was careful, scholarly, respectful of the cultural sensitivity of what she was recording. The field notes, available at Barnard College's archive, are less filtered. One entry, undated but contextually from 1934, describes an informant who told her about a hogan that had been abandoned for 30 years. The woman said her grandmother had been present when the family left. She said the family did not leave because someone died inside. They left because of what they heard coming up through the floor 3 days before anyone died. Reichard's note on this account is brief. She wrote, "She said it called to him by name, and then he died." These are not isolated accounts. This is where the pattern becomes visible. Across the ethnographic literature, across the incident reports filed with the Navajo Nation's cultural preservation offices, across the accounts collected by researchers working in the region in the second half of the 20th century, there is a consistent structure to what is experienced at abandoned hogans in the specific locations associated with older underground disturbances. It is heard before it is seen. It does not use words at first. It uses sounds that resemble words, that carry the rhythm and cadence of speech, but in a register that does not match any language the witnesses know. A researcher named Carol Locust who conducted interviews with Navajo traditional healers in the 1980s for the University of Arizona's Native American Research and Training Center, published a paper in 1988 describing a type of entity that came up unprompted across multiple interviews when healers discussed illness contracted near abandoned structures. The healers used a term that Locus translates carefully as the thing that has no name because naming it gives it direction. The direction it moves, in every account, is up. Not from the walls, not from outside the structure. Upward through the floor, every time, across 60 years of documented accounts. It is in the floor, under the floor, beneath the structures that have been abandoned for the right reasons, in the right places, for long enough. The chindi that descends into the older darkness below meets something already there, and what comes back up is not the chindi anymore. Daniel Whitehorse's notes, the ones removed from the Federal Heritage Project file, have a partial reconstruction. His colleague who received the photograph also received a summary in an email that was preserved in a personal archive and shared years later with a researcher documenting suppressed cases in federal archaeological projects. The summary describes what Whitehorse reported on his third visit to the Hogan. He had brought equipment, a basic audio recorder and a ground temperature sensor because the project was also doing preliminary geothermal mapping of the region. On the third visit, the ground temperature beneath the Hogan registered 11 degrees cooler than the surrounding soil at the same depth. Not colder near the surface, colder at depth, which is the inverse of what normal geothermal gradient produces. Heat increases as you go down. It does not decrease. The audio recorder captured something. Whitehorse described it in his email summary as rhythmic, occurring at regular intervals, coming from beneath the floor, not from the walls, not from outside the structure, from beneath. He wrote that it reminded him of breathing. He wrote that it had been going on for a very long time. He wrote that the rhythm was the patience of something that did not measure time the way anything living measures it. He wrote one more thing. He wrote that he had heard his name. The recording then stopped. The recorder had been running on fresh batteries. It had been running for 11 minutes. The battery read empty when he retrieved it, as though it had been running for hours. He did not go back a fourth time. He filed his report. His notes were removed. The photograph still exists. The cold spot beneath that floor, if it was ever followed up, has not produced any published findings. There are places on the Navajo Nation where you can ask a traditional elder about the abandoned hogans in specific locations, and they will not answer you. They will change the subject with a fluency that tells you the subject has been changed before, many times, for many people who asked. They are not being evasive out of rudeness. They are being careful in the way that people are careful around things that respond to attention. Because the thing beneath the floor listens. The chindi descends. What it finds in the lower dark is old, older than the Dine, older than the Anasazi who sealed their kivas and left behind the phrase that still sits in that 1987 field report, older than the names we have for what lived in that landscape before the people came up through the reed and walked out into the light. The abandoned hogans are not empty houses. They are open doors. The ghost holes in the north wall let something out, but a door that opens for an exit can be used as an entrance. And in the specific locations where the old disturbances align, where the archaeology shows sealed chambers with unusual deposits, where the field notes from the 1880s and the ethnographic records from the 1930s and the email from 2003 all describe the same thing, coming from the same direction. The door does not open one way. It opens both ways. The Hogan in the Chusca Mountains is still standing. The ghost hole is still in the north wall. No one from the surrounding community goes near it. They have not gone near it for decades. Not since before Daniel Whitehorse visited with his recorder and his temperature sensor and came back to his vehicle at 2 a.m, unable to explain how 11 minutes had taken 3 hours. The cold is still there, in the ground beneath that floor. They don't go back. What the Navajo said was, living beneath the abandoned Hogan is something that descends from the surface and returns with something attached to it. Something that has been in the lower dark long enough that it knows the language of names. The sealed kivas were perhaps meant to contain it, and the question of why those seals show disturbance from below is a question that has one published reference and no published answer. What it is waiting for, no account has ever said. What it is, the elders know. And they do not say, because saying it gives it direction. The cold is still down there. The door in the north wall is still open. They don't go back. Stay curious, stay skeptical, stay in the light,